What's going on, everybody? This is Epic Fox. Today we're going to look at the World War One game in 1918, Storm in the West. It's a two-player game, and one player plays the Germans, and the other player plays the Allies, the French, British, Belgium, and the US. You can even divide it up and make it more players than that if you wanted to easily. So, you got the map down in front of you. I already got the setup going on because obvious reasons, it takes a long time to do, and we'll get to the unit details here in just a second. But other than the map, to the upper right, you have the calendar looking thing, and that is the data tracker. It keeps track of the German morale, the Allied morale, as well as the replenishment tracker. The replenishments are different from reinforcements, which is that bar over on the right where I have all those other counters stacked up, and that is the reinforcement tracker. And there is a difference between the two. We'll get to that later as well. So right now, down on the map, you have the blue counters are the French forces, and the red counters up there are the British forces, and above them, I'm not sure if you can see them way up top over here, are the Belgium forces, orangish gold counters. So you do have the different terrain markings directly printed on this hex map. It is a paper map. So I have a thin sheet of plastic over it. I'm trying to avoid the glare with this low light. It looks pretty good to me. And we're ready to go ahead and take a closer look at things. The Germans are on the opposite side of the Allies on the right or east of their opponents, and they have black counters and sort of a grayish sea green counters. The black counters are the German Strasstruppen, and those are the stormtroopers. They are hefty and they carry some firepower to them. They have an ominous value rating all the way across. Their attack, defense, and movement value is 666. So that's them, the only black units on the map. And they also are backed up by their regular German line infantry as well as a lower quality reserve type of units. And all of those have different values. So the blue are the French, as I've already stated, and they have infantry as well as armor and cavalry, and they also have colonels. So the British have all of the above as well. Now everybody seems to have aircraft, at least all the major powers. Not the Belgians. The Portuguese and the Canadians are represented in the British forces. However, their counters are red as well because they can mix with the British units, and there are mixing rules as well as stacking rules that apply here on the map at all times. We'll discuss that in a little future clip here. So um, the setup is already going, like I said. Basically, during deployment, the Allies deploy first, so they don't know where the Germans can set up their main spearheads, etc. And there's kind of a little suspense and surprise action going on there. The German player can really do some tomfoolery and trickery if he's really sneaky. Basically, I have already set up here in the center all the stormtroopers and regular line infantry. That's where I'm going to focus the main German attack, and they're going to try and push all the way to Paris very quickly. And the Paris has 3 victory point hexes in it. So I figure that's the quickest way to end this with the Germans. The Allies didn't know where they were coming from, so I tried to spread them out as evenly across that front as possible. The Allies do have to maintain in every hex of frontline Allied trench, they either have to maintain a unit in direct hex control or zone of control of the adjacent hex. So basically, you have to have a unit at least one every 2 hexes to maintain a zone of control along every hex square of the front line. And then you could stack them bigger and smaller or whatever, or spread it out even further. I've chosen to go a minimum of every other hex and then stack them from there because there is a unique combat support um, factor in this combat system in this game. So we'll take a look at that later as well. And with the Germans, what the Germans can do is they can set up after the Allies have set up, so they can focus on weaker points. But not only that, is the player can choose how to stack their forces and counters however they want, and your opponent can't look at your stacks until they declare their attacks or defenses. So This allows, like I said before, a lot of trickery to take place. And what you can do, what I've already noticed you could do, is you could stack up, you could put one stormtrooper counter on top of a whole stack of weak people. So you can make your forces commit, you can make your enemy commit a lot of their forces to defending against that stack when really they're just wasted effort. Or even better, what you could do is you could put a whole bunch of your weak guys down here with, or just one counter of weak guys on top of all your hidden stormtroopers. So your opponent has no idea that this is your strongest part of your line in this section right here. He thinks this is your strongest part or whatever. So there is a lot of options when you're setting up, I think, as a German player, and it would lead to a lot of different unique games, I think. And along with the simplicity, I think you could get some decent replayability out of this game before you put it up and shelve it. So I think we're about ready to start. Oh, I did leave out the US forces. They are over on the right-hand side. They're the dark green counters, the olive drab counters. I don't know if you can see them on the screen here, but they're right here. And they start very limited amount begin coming on right away. And it kind of is a slow trickle up until mid game, and then I really pile it on in mid July of this game. The game does take place in the final 9 months of World War One, which is where the basically both sides are given their last hurrahs, their final big pushes, and it could go either way. So that's where it starts in the early April and runs all the way to early November of 1918, obviously. And it's a storm in the West. So we'll go ahead and start it off. Just like any other game, there's a turn sequence to follow, and this one begins with the Germans' turn. So the Germans first have an initial supply phase, and that's basically where you judge whether or not units are all in supply or if one is cut off or out of supply. And that basically details, the obvious things. Control of hexes, zones of control, etc., and clear paths, clear lines to your frontline forces will determine your chain of supply to those units. There are special rules like fortress supply and stuff like that, where you can have units out of supply of your main supply chain, but still maintain a force, a stockpiled force. That's what that resembles, or there's other methods of supply in there, I believe, as well. So after that, there's a replacement phase where the German player can choose to use his replacements, and he would move down his replacement marker on his data track and replace it out of his dead pile, which is where you keep all of your eliminated units that have been taken off of the map, where you can bring those back using your replenishments. And each one point of replenishment is one step. So it takes two replenishment points to get a full counter back on the map. Now, they do have to start off in your rear lines in the main cities, and how you get them to your front lines rather quickly is during the strategic movement phase, and that is the third step. And you can load up to 4 units as the German player onto a train and ship them on off to the front lines. And they have unlimited movement as long as they start and end in a city or town, and obviously a friendly city or town, and as long as they don't break any of the previous movement rules, like moving through, impassable terrain or something like that. So it's pretty basic, and they can do that with 4 units. They can't move any other way if they do that, so there's no regular movement or infiltration movement, which is the third type of movement in this game. So once they move on a train, they're done. They can attack or defend normally, but it involves no movement. So after that is the regular movement phase, which is self-described. And after that is the first combat phase, followed by the infiltration movement phase, which only certain units can infiltrate, the Strasstruppen being one of them. And after that is the terminal supply phase, which is where you affect or put into effect the out of supply units, I believe. Don't give me I may have it mixed up between those two supply stages here, but we'll get into that as soon as we start the game. That's what we're playing this first game for anyway. After that, it's the allied player's turn, and they basically follow the same steps. The initial supply phase, replacement and reinforcement phase, strategic movement phase, regular movement phase, first combat phase, infiltration movement phase, and after that, the second combat phase, and then terminal supply. And after those, you're going to do a victory check, and then you're going to move to turn record check, and then it's going to start all over. So we can go ahead and start off here. As I stated, the Germans are going to go ahead and begin the thing. So their initial supply phase is a no-go. But before we do that, there's actually a step that I skipped, and it takes place. It's not going to take place this turn, but turns 2 through 5 and 12 through 6, they take a weather check. The Germans will roll weather check in the beginning of those turns, and that result will affect both sides for the entirety of those turns. So we'll remember to do that on the second turn. And the Germans will then go to step 1, which is the initial supply phase. There are no issues there. We move along to the replacement phase. The Germans aren't going to call in any replacements just yet. Of course, they don't have a dead pile going on, so they couldn't do that even if they wanted to. Strategic movement phase, and I don't have anybody in the rear lines that I need to move up forward, so we can skip that as well. Now we're going to do the regular movement phase. And I've already pretty much set up the way I wanted the Germans to start off the attack. So this turn, we don't need to take any German movement either. And we move along to the first combat phase. And we will go ahead and start combat declaration really quickly. Let me go ahead and think about which section I want to start off with. So here we're going to do a little example of some combat, and we will perform it with these 2 units of German stormtroopers, and they're going to assault this force of French infantry divisions in this hex right there. And what's going to take place in combat is you're going to add up all the attackers' attack values, and you're going to take all the defenders' defending values, and you're going to take that attack value, divide it by the defenders' values, and then you're going to reach your combat odds. Now that math could equal 1.9999, and you're still at a 1-to-1 combat odds. You have to cross that threshold of 2.00 to get 2-to-1 combat odds. So keep that in mind. Now, here in this example, these stormtroopers in this particular stack is 2 units of stormtroopers and 1 unit of German line infantry. This stack of German stormtroopers is only 2 units of stormtroopers. Those 2 stacks are going to total 29 points. They are attacking a French force with the defensive value of each of 5. There's 3 in a stack maximum. That's the stacking rules. And that defense totals 15. So you can see right there, 29 points divided by 15 is very close to 2, but not quite so. It is 1-to-1 combat odds, which is bad for those German attackers. So something that they can do to change that is the artillery group Brockmüller right here. Now they have a firepower value of 15. However, the kicker with that, they have a range of 2, so they can contribute to this attack. But the thing is they can only contribute the firepower up to what limit the infantry have put in. So if there is only 10 points of firepower coming from the German main attack, that artillery group can only contribute 10 points of support for a total of 20 on the attack value. Here in this example, the artillery group can use its full force at 15 points. And so that will put us at a total here of 44 attack points between the infantry and the artillery. 44 attack points divided by the 15 is almost 3, but not quite there. So we have 2-to-1 odds, just a little bit better than where we were at 2-to-1 attack odds. And you can see on the combat table, the 2-to-1 attack odds is only the 3rd from the left, and it's pretty brutal to the attackers. The results, the number on the left is the attackers, the number on the right is the defenders. So I do think that this game reflects the combat rather well, I think, or at least we're going to find out with the attackers losing so many, just, you know, with the type of warfare that was depicted here in this game. So we're looking at 2-to-1 combat odds with this combat. Now the DRMs, any DRMs we have with Allied Trench we're assaulting is a -2 on a dice roll, but if it's a German Strasstruppen unit, they only suffer a -1. So the -1 will be applied to their dice roll modifier, and the artillery group Brockmüller, well, they add in a +1 to the Germans' DRM as well. So the +1, -1, they negate each other, and there's a 0 DRM on this roll. Now, assuming if there was aircraft or artillery, or excuse me, not artillery, but armor, tanks, then those add DRMs. They don't add direct firepower to the combat, they add DRMs. So that's how that works there. And we're going to go ahead and make this roll. The rolls in combat are made on a d6 here. So we are at, with the Germans, a 2-to-1 combat odds with a 0 DRM. And we're going to go ahead and roll on a d6. And we roll a 3. So a 3 on a 2-to-1 combat results in 2 attacking steps lost and 1 defending step lost. And these are chosen by the players. So the Germans will have to remove 2 steps of units. And what they're going to do right off the bat here, I can already tell you, is they are going to save their stormtroopers at full health, and they're going to remove that unit of German line infantry there. So their German line infantry remain in full health, but that German the German stormtroopers remain in full health, but the German line infantry has been totally eliminated. And that gets placed over in the German dead pile, where the German player can now use that for his replenishments and mark them down lower on the data track whenever he does so at the beginning of his turn. So now the defender needs to put on their losses as well. Actually, I did that backwards. The defender applies their losses and then the attacker applies their losses. However, this is just an example. With the defenders, what they can do, one option they have is to take one of their step losses, whatever the result was, and apply it to their retreat. So they did only take 1 loss. So if they wanted to retreat and give up ground, they have to retreat as a full stack. However many were there originally, they would retreat. Okay, so now since there was only 1 casualty that they sustained, that retreat would completely negate that casualty takes. It counts as taking that casualty. If they would have taken 2 or 3 hits on that combat, then they would have had to retreat. That would count as 1, and then they would have had to flip, 1 or 2 steps respectively, depending on how many hits they received. So it is cumulative. You don't get away from all the casualties just because you retreated. You only get away from 1 step loss. So you can see here, this is Reims, and it's worth 3 victory points. So I'm sure the French see retreat as an absolute, 0 option on the table. It's not going to happen. So they are going to be forced to take that casualty. I'm not going to mess around with the tweezers here real quick. I'm just going to go ahead and flip them over, and then I will use those to slide them back up in there. So now you have that round of combat is finished, and what you would do is, I'll make markers for these games, or you'd have to just go from north to south or south to north or whatever would be the best organization means to do it. But I think some counters are in call here to mark which units have attacked, and so these 2 units have now attacked. These 2 units have now attacked, as well as the artillery group, so the artillery group can't support anymore. And then you would move on to the next unit and the next unit and so on and so on. To me, that this particular area seems a little weak in the defenses. If the Germans can manage to kind of muster their strength in and get some good combined force attacks in here, I think they have a clear shot before the French can get in there and really defend, or before the U.S. comes in mass. The French have a limited number of replenishments, but they're up there. The Germans are definitely going to take a beating in this one, though. Like I said, I already made some heavy mistakes off from the bat. Right, what I can tell you is, first off, the deployment. I did not deploy my forces correctly for combined arms, and the second thing would be I did skip my first movement phase because I figured I was already in line good enough for combat, and I turned out to be wrong. There's a lot of areas in here where I could have adjusted force and put in some good solid combined firepower, and maybe gotten a lot better odds than 1-to-1 and 2-to-1 and stuff like that. So I'm going to go ahead and play through this game, even with any mistakes or errors that I may have felt that I made early on. I'm going to go ahead and play through it, and at the end, I'll go ahead and maybe tell you some highlights, put some pictures up of mid-game and stuff. I don't want to play this whole game going through here, but I just wanted to give you the gist of it. 1918 Storm in the West, and I'll be back here as soon as we know whether the course of history has changed or if it's gonna stay the path. Here we are after turn 4, right before the start of turn 5. Nobody's gone yet, but there's been quite a bit of action. I'm not sure if you can tell much has changed besides that streak of light going on across the board there. But for the most part, there was a lot of pushing and shoving back and forth, and I think the Allies got the upper hand for the most part, let me tell you. Down in the south here, there's been a lot of pushing back and forth between the two. It's a lot of light skirmishes, low firepower points going on, high maneuvering warfare down there. Nobody's really scored any VPs. Not too much territory has changed hands. At one point, some French did push back quite a bit towards there and were finally eliminated with prejudice. So up further here, it's kind of a stalemate. The French had just railed in some heavy reinforcements there to that city down there. I can't remember which one that is, but overall, it's going along quite slow for the German progress. The French have established sort of a line up here, what's left of it at least, in this region. The stormtroopers have absolutely demolished that area. However, they have managed to get a division of infantry, quite a large stack around the flank here, and all that's left of them, the defenses, is one solo wounded step, and then it's the artillery group right behind them. So their flank is in trouble. They've been outmaneuvered, and that's not good for the Germans. The French are reinforcing this side right here, and the Allies have railed in over the course since the start of turn 2. The U.S. arrived and started railing in from Paris. These regiments right here, and since the French have been using up so much of the rail system lately, this last U.S. regiment all the way over there has ended up having to hoof it all the way over to try and group up at a rally point down there. And they're basically going to be the reserves of this region because there is a high chance that the French are going to collapse in that region, whether or not they destroy the artillery. So up top further where the British are engaging with the Germans, you can see there's a large line of British and not much left of the German defenders. The Germans have tried to ship in some rail units right there, and they'll try and work their way forward. I think they got enough movement points to get over there in this first movement phase that they have coming up. So that'll reinforce their German line in the secondary trenches. They've already been pushed out of their primary trenches at that particular point. So they're scrambling up there as quick as they can. Even further up top, the Belgium forces have pretty much worked down that high northern flank of the Germans there, and they even had enough manpower to send some back to defend the cities back there for the reinforcements coming in. So they're pushing forward there, and they've been pushed almost back out of their primary trench, but not yet. There is 2 victory points right behind them. The British have captured a total of 3 victory locations so far. The Canadians captured the biggest prize, I think, at 4 or 5 victory points. I don't remember. Verdun has not changed hands. It's still in the hands of the French, and that's about what's going on there. So the French have received some of their reinforcements and they got them marching towards their front line. So on the data tracker over here in the upper right, the replenishment tracker and the victory point tracker is what we want to take a look at. The Germans have ate through a lot of their reinforcements, and they started off with 24 and now they're down to 12. So the replenishments are draining fast. The French have also used quite a bit of theirs. They're at level 6 points now. However, a lot of theirs are fresh on the field, just arriving. The Germans arrived a couple turns ago, although they do have one fresh stack in there. The morale, the German morale has dropped to now 11 points, and the Allied morale has risen to 19 because of the city swaps and victory points that are captured. These are actually not victory points, they're morale points. So if I say victory points, I'm describing the morale points. The dead piles have built up rather large for both sides and then emptied out rather quickly for replenishments. So the US has just started to trickle in over the last couple turns. They really have a lot of forces coming in mid-July in this game, and I don't know if the Germans are going to be able to resist that because the way it's looking, the British have the center north pretty tight, and the U.S. could come in here and get the center south, where the French are kind of thinning out a little bit, and they might be able to wrap it up if maybe the French consolidate up here and the U.S. consolidate in the south. We'll see, or vice versa. So the French may need to worry about their eastern flank over here. There is some German forces around here that could combine and maybe cause some trouble down there in those far out regions. Like I said, that's high mobility region out there that's going on right now. It's a lot of action, a lot of movement, and it's pretty fun. There has been a lot of aircraft support on all sides. They get called in pretty much in the most important combat of each turn, and that's been interesting. It's caused some of the combat roles, the DRMs, to switch up to very beneficial odds depending on the side you're looking from. And that's about it for the first 4 turns. And we'll see you here in a little bit. All right, we're going to bring it to a close right here because the Germans failed their morale check at the end of their turn on turn 12. At the end of turn 11, the Allies had recaptured a couple big objectives. The first one and main one being the Verdun, and that was worth 5 victory points alone. So there was a couple others that the British had retaken for a second time, which just put them over the top there. The Germans couldn't come through. They were really trying to reach down there to bring them back up above the limit there. If they could have gotten there, they would have, but they just couldn't push through fast enough. There was this guy right here, these divisions, they came around actually from, they were the original divisions that captured Toul, and they came around here and crossed and were trying to hit from the rear and possibly grab these 2 victory points as well. They did get here, and then they were pushed. They had 3 units, and they were pushed back. They would have taken 3 hits. I took a 2-step loss and chose to retreat, and they didn't see. I guess the Germans didn't see the end of the road coming. They didn't know. So otherwise, maybe they wouldn't have retreated. Would have done a couple things. I was trying to be patient with them, but yet I was still trying to be very aggressive with the Allies because I knew the Allies had them on a string, and a real commander would not have let up if you would have had your enemy the way I had them as the Allies. So I continued to push forward with them, and the results are right there in front of you. It's over. The game itself, I enjoy a little bit. It's a World War I game. It's not my genre, but it was fun. I'll enjoy it this weekend, I think, especially knowing the rules. I'm really gonna squash my friend in this. No, I'll go easy on him. But no, I think a lot of this game is the deployment, and after that, there's some deciding factors in there. The movement, a lot of guys, if you can control the certain terrain paths that allow you to move units quickly, the clear terrain, then you have a lot of options and you can move your forces around quite a bit and harass with smaller forces and then strike with bigger ones in multiple different directions. So you can keep your opponents on your toes. The reinforcement with the rail and bringing them in from your rear lines rather quickly is seems rather generous when you read it, but the 4 unit limit, that makes a big difference. And it really makes you think and determine what you're going to ship that turn to where, because you'll find yourself needing reinforcements in many different spots. But it's a pretty cool little game. The theme is really good. I like the last 9 months of the Great War. So there's not much representation of the tank wars and the trench wars. The trenches do add modifiers, stuff like that, but this is a high, strategic level game. So if you're looking for tactical down in the trenches stuff, lots of modifiers, this isn't it. But then again, it was published in a magazine, so if you're interested in World War One, I think you can pick it up for approximately $15, 15 to $20. Other than that, if you're not, I'd probably stay away from it because after this weekend, I'm probably never gonna. I'll probably shelve it and put it up. So that's about it. Thanks for joining me, and hope to see you next time.